From the heartland of America, it's the Bail in the Midwest podcast. Hosted by Shane Rolf. Executive producer, David Stuckman.
Hello and welcome to the Bail in the Midwest podcast, where we explore a variety of topics related to bail, pretrial release, and the criminal justice system in the Midwest. My name is Shane Rolf. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Kansas Bail Agents Association, and I've worked in this field for the past 39 years. Now, bounty hunters are part of the American zeitgeist, the stuff of Old West legend, movies, and of course, the Dog the Bounty Hunter television show. And oftentimes, these showbiz portrayals are way off from actual bounty hunters. For example, in the movie Wanted Dead or Alive, Rutger Hauer played a bounty hunter going after international terrorists. And in the recent Amazon Prime show, The Bondsman, Kevin Bacon is a bounty hunter hired by the devil to track down escaped demons. So, not really true to life bounty hunters. I mean, I've brought up some bad people, but I don't think they qualified as actual escaped demons. But as much as bounty hunters and bondsmen are part of American culture, there are surprisingly few nonfiction books written about bounty hunters. I mean, we all know Stephanie Plum in those books, but of course there is the granddaddy of all bounty hunting books, which is The Hunter by Christopher Keane, which was a biography about Ralph Papa Thorson. But it was first published 50 years ago and was actually turned into a movie starring Steve McQueen. Unfortunately, turned out to be the last movie before his death. And then several years later, after Papa Thorson's death, Keane followed up with a book called The Huntress about Thorson's wife and daughter taking over his bounty hunting work. And of course, Dwayne Chapman or Dog the Bounty Hunter has a biography written about him, and he has written a couple of other books about his life and faith. But I think one of the reasons that the profession often suffers in the public eye is because there's a lack of realistic material from the perspective of the bondsman or the bounty hunter. We definitely need more books from the actual true life perspective of the bounty hunter and the bondsman. My guest today, Grandma Susan, has decided to help rectify that pop culture deficiency and has written and published her own biography of sorts called Grandma the Bounty Hunter. Now, of course, Grandma Susan is the nom de plume of Susan Oetting, who is a bail bondsman and bounty hunter working out of Fort Wayne, Indiana. So, Susan, or Grandma preferably, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, we appreciate you taking the time to be here with us. It's always, like I said, there's very few actual bail authors. And so if we have one, we definitely want to get him on so we can talk about the bail experience here. So tell us a little bit about how you actually came to be. I always refer to this as bail world, but how did you get involved in bail in the first place? Everybody has their own kind of unique story.
Yes. About 20 years ago, 18, 19, something like that, my best friend was dating the owner's son. And we had dinner, and they were looking for a recovery manager and bail agent. And just during the dinner, he decided that I would be a good candidate. And so he invited me to meet with his mother, and his mother hired me on the spot.
Well, I want to get into that a little bit more too, but let's follow my track here. Is that a lot of people don't really think about geography when it comes to crime and bail, especially. For example, I'm on the Kansas side of Kansas City, and the entire metro area has about 2 million people. So we have a lot of cross-state activities. Whereas, for example, Wichita, Kansas, which is part of the Kansas Bail Agents Association, is kind of on an island all by itself, kind of surrounded by rural areas. And other than the I-35 corridor running through, it doesn't really get a whole lot of outside influences. So tell us about Fort Wayne, where you're at. You're not too far from 3 different states, I think Ohio, Michigan, Illinois, and actually not even that far from Canada. So what is Fort Wayne like? How's that from a bail perspective? And I mean, we're talking crime hellhole or suburban paradise or someplace kind of in between?
I would say it's someplace in between. We've had a lot of action through the Detroit, Chicago. We're kind of in a triangle is what they call it. And we're right in between. So we do have, we have our crime, and we've had good bail for many years, even through the bail reform. We were able to withstand all of the cash bail. And there's several counties in Indiana that went cash bail, but we've, the 10% authorized through the court.
Right.
And then, but we've been very fortunate that our judges in our county and our prosecutor, they still have a lot of respect for bail.
Well, and that's always a danger in elected officials that, suddenly they change their mind and you have a new judge come in and decides, well, this is the way we're going to do this, or a new prosecutor comes in and suddenly everybody's that has been functioning with one set of standards in mind and believing that's going to be continuing, and suddenly you just get upended. I've seen that all over the country in different things, especially in bail. So how do you handle the Chicago aspect? We've always, like in my where I'm at, we've always been extra careful with people that are in Kansas City area that are from St. Louis, since Illinois is just on the other side of the river, and we can't really go into Illinois. I mean, I would think you would be in the same boat for people on the western side of the city. How do you deal with the Illinois? I mean, I realize you're on the east side of the state and Illinois is on the west side, so it's probably not all the time, but still, I would think that would be a concern.
Yes, we have several people out of Chicago that we have bailed out, and we usually will ask for full collateral because it is like Mexico. You're not going across the border, and if you do go across the border, you better be able to get them in the trunk and get them back across the state line before they see you. But yeah, we've had to be. We've had to think outside the box, and there's been times that I've been able to work with the probation officers up there, and they've been able to have the people arrested because they've had an open warrant, here in Fort Wayne. So there's just things we have to do that is not conventional.
Well, and my experience on that has been if you're going into a smaller area of Illinois, not that you can go in and grab someone, but you can go in and locate someone and then call local authorities and say, hey, this person has an extraditable warrant. Can you send an officer out to get there? I have eyes on him right now. And they'll be like, well, you're not supposed to pick them up. It's like, no, I'm not picking them up. I'm just identifying to you where they are.
Yeah.
But in my experience, we've not gotten that same degree of cooperation from like the Chicago Police Department. So I didn't know if that was an experience you had or if sometimes if you have a contact or somebody there, I mean, most police departments are quite happy to have fugitives, picked up and taken out of their jurisdiction because they would tend to commit more crimes anyway.
That's so true.
And has that been in your experience in Illinois as well, that, the smaller areas, the Springfields or smaller towns are more helpful, and then, Chicago? So. Yeah,
and I think since they're not bail friendly, there's something about bail agents that just is, it's a negative thing for police officers, especially in unfriendly bail states. So yes, we've had several times that we've been able to locate, have eyes on, and the officer would say, as the person was getting out of the car, going into their work at a factory, and the officer said, touch him and you'll go to jail, and actually let him walk into work with an active warrant.
All right. Yeah, I mean, and Chicago wonders why they have a crime problem.
Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit about what's going on, politically bail-wise in Illinois, or not Illinois, Indiana, and then we'll get to more about you in the book here. So what's going on? I mean, what I'm reading here from a distance is that there's a constitutional amendment on the ballot for this fall that would basically expand the ability of the courts to deny bail altogether. It seems like something we've seen in other places. It's not exactly the same as New Mexico. I mean, it's similar, and I know that the bondsmen in Mexico thought that they had the deal all worked out on that, and then the court there made a ruling afterwards that essentially was, either lock him up or let him go. Are you concerned in Indiana that's the direction that the things are heading, or do you think you have some agreement from the legislature and the courts on that?
Yeah, it's definitely burdensome. We are quite concerned about it. We've been able to ride that wave for a while, and with this new legislation coming out, we're not sure where it's going to fall. The one judge that we have that is bail friendly, she's retiring in December. And so we are quite concerned what's going to happen. And then one thing that was good about some of the legislation was the charity bill.
Right.
There was good legislation and laws put in place, so they wasn't able just to come in and take away bail. So they have a lot. They have to be licensed. They can only have so many. So that was good. But this new legislation, I am concerned.
Well, yeah, the charitable bail aspect, that was never designed to be a solution. I mean, the people that put that in there, I mean, I know that they made it think, they put it forth like, well, we're helping these poor, unfortunate people that are in custody. And they were gathering money from people who never had any real experience with the criminal justice system. So these were not really poor unfortunates that were sitting in custody. And so they would, but the goal on that from the people that once they had the money was to try and break the system. I mean, it was essentially a form of protest. And so then we would just let everyone go out of the jail, and that would prove that that bail was pointless. That if we just let everybody go without bail, but one, that didn't work that way, and so we saw there was a large number of people that missed court, large amount of people that committed additional crimes beyond that, and so crowdsourcing bail is never really all that great an idea. You're not, there's nobody that has any real interest in it. It's one thing if your church gets together and goes, okay, our church members in custody, there's this bad situation that happened. We're going to pool our resources to get that person out. Then you have an entire church that's interested in making sure that person goes to court. But if you have strangers from far-flung areas across the country that don't know the person, don't know anything about them, and then let them go, that's just going to be a problem. So, okay, so enough about the politics. Let's talk about you in the book. Now, you indicated earlier you got in this because the son of the owner basically hired you. And I think most people think that's not a really woman-heavy line of work. But there's a lot of women in bail, a lot more women in bail than the general public realizes. I know that at least 3 of the state associations, Oklahoma, North Carolina, and New York, they're all headed by women. I know that personally, our association, KBA, would grind to a halt if not for the work that Candy Crow puts in as our education chair. So, and there was a woman that you mentioned in your book, so I want to kind of try and pull some book stuff. And there's a woman named Thelma who you mentioned in the book, and she actually was the dedication on your book. So can you tell us a little bit about her? She seemed like an interesting character.
She always said to me every time we would go somewhere, and we traveled a lot, and we did do bounty hunting together. She called it recovery, but she always said, "I'm Thelma and you're Louise." And so that's why I dedicated the book to Thelma. And she's the reason I wrote the book.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, no, that kind of all makes sense there. Because in the pictures, there, I mean, obviously she looked older, and I read in subsequent that she'd passed. I mean, part of the thing when you're looking at it, you go, okay, what kind of phone does she have? Because
yes,
people our age have kind of come up through where the phone you had old landlines and rotary phones and pagers when you first started doing this, and to cell phones. But you can kind of get an idea at what stage it is by what kind of phone you had. Is it a giant brick, or is it the Star flip phone, or are you doing an iPhone? And so I think she had kind of the
giant,
right on
the
flip area. Exactly. No, I had one of those. I actually had the cheap knockoff Radio Shack when I first started. That was ridiculous amount of money back then, and every time I would drop it, it would break the antenna. It was I much prefer the sturdier versions that we have now that you can do everything on. So a lot of women involved in bail, and I think there's been some people, as many as 50% of the people involved in the bail industry, particularly owners of bail agencies, oftentimes are women. But certain aspects of the bail business, especially the fugitive part, which you're active in, can really be a contact sport. Do you worry about that when you're out there trying to grab people?
Yeah, I do. I never had any problems until one time, and it's in the book, and I call it "tossed around like a rag doll," because I did. I was. It was one of those easy captures, those. And every time somebody says, "Oh, it's going to be easy, easy in and out," it never is. And I was let into the house. The family was wanting the son, to be taken in because he missed court and it was $10,000. All my recovery people were off, and I took my stepson with me. And he had never been. And I couldn't get any of the police to help because even though the warrant was issued, it wasn't completely active in their system.
Right.
Yeah. So then one thing led to another. I get inside the house and all the doors somehow become locked. And my son can't get to me. He's at the back door. And this young man we found out he had mental health issues. And he was just scared. And so he did. He tossed me around like a rag doll. I was thrown into the walls. And that was the last time I went anywhere without a trained recovery agent to go with.
And that's really important, because one of the things when I read that story, it's the chapter tossed around like a rag doll.
Mm-hmm.
But I was also struck by the insistence of the co-signer in that chapter. It's like, come get him. You got to come get him. He's here right now. Why aren't you here yet? I mean, granted, I would much rather have the helpful co-signer than a hostile co-signer. But when you have somebody who's overly helpful like that, they can kind of push you into a situation you don't want to be caught in.
That is true.
You don't get to pick the manner and the place and the method of the apprehension. Not that you always are able to do that, but if you can, you want to control the situation.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for instance, I've heard people say that they never want to pick someone up inside the house. Whereas if I'm involved, or my people, I really don't want to get involved in a foot chase or a car chase, because I can't run very fast. I'm not 20 anymore. I'd rather have someone in an enclosed area if possible. But how do you normally like to have an apprehension set up on those situations?
Well, now I don't trust that the family will help, because in that situation, none of the family helped.
Right.
And there were people in there that could have stopped it, and they didn't. So, just like you said, I wasn't in control of the situation. I was reacting to her demands. And I should have just waited. I could have waited for the warrant to become active and just take the chance on the kid, whether he was leaving or not leaving, walking down the street, coming back home. If I would have known that he had mental health issues, that could have been a very good bit of information. But, it's hard to ask every indemnitor. Does your family member have any kind of mental health issues? And with HIPAA, we don't have to really worry about that too much, but a lot of the public think that the HIPAA is something that they have on us, but as well as I do, we have access really to all information. But we do ask from time to time, and just not on paperwork. We don't ask them to check a box. We just communicate now, but in a way that we can find out if there's anything that we need to write on our application to be aware of.
Well, and we have a block for health issues or mental health issues. So it's like, if somebody's missing a foot or something, one, they're identifiers, but also you kind of know what's going in. But mental health issues can run the full gamut. You can have someone who's, schizophrenic, bipolar, and someone who just has anxiety issues. But it might be the person with the anxiety issues that completely panics and freaks out on you when you're trying to pick them up because I don't want to go to jail.
Right.
So, again, there's only so much, pre-diagnosis you can do on that. Ultimately, you have to get that person back in and get them returned to court, in the least painful, least damaging, method you can possibly get that done in. So, a couple other stories in there. Your book has several chapters in it, and each one tells the story of a different bond jumper that you were after. Sometimes the chapters are titled after the person you're picking up. But I really found it illuminating how so many aspects of each of these stories was a little bit different. Meaning you really had to think on your feet and adjust to a changing environment. In one case, you had to pick up someone at work and pretend to be a customer, so you couldn't really be dressed in your bounty gear and come in all tactical and everything else. It seems like there were a lot of those stories where you really had to kind of think on your feet and adjust to the situation. Can you tell us a little bit about maybe one or two of those?
Yeah, I like the story where I had several phone calls that the fugitive was asleep in bed. And we never could find out exactly. The police would go, nobody would let them in. They had those metal doors, and there was just no way of getting in the house. So that was the one story that, within minutes, I was at the house, from the office to their house, and I had to really think fast. And I just happened to have some hair product in the back seat that I had from a hair salon, had my hair done the day before. And it was in a nice little bag that had the name of the salon. And I just looked back and grabbed it. And I just had to, within 50 feet, come up with some, line of, stuff, BS. But yeah, I mean, you have to be able to think fast on your feet. I always look at it, if you're a good poker player, because you have to be able to not be read. People can't really be able to see that you're lying to them, that you're deceiving them. But yeah, it's definitely something that you can't be taught. I think you either have it or you don't. I think that, early on in my career, I had a lot of hard knocks that I just had to learn as I went. There's only so much you can be trained, and the rest of it's instinct. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, and there is a certain level of deception that goes on with trying to pick up someone who doesn't want to be caught. And most people, you're brought up, tell the truth, George Washington, I cannot tell a lie, all this. And so there's a certain, dissonance in, that you're not necessarily comfortable with that. And so, so you have to rationalize and sort of justify it. I mean, the way I've always justified it is like, well, you know what? They lied to me first. They promised me that they were going to go to court, and that's a lie. If I have to deceive them just a little bit to get them back into custody, it's a greater good. It's not really harmful, but you still. I've had a lot of like beginning bounty hunters, that they're very much, trying to justify, well, this wasn't really a lie. It's like, I don't care if it was, so you don't need to convince me. I mean, one is, as long as you're not lying to me about something important, if you've told them something that gets them in a situation where you can pick them up without you or them getting hurt, I'm perfectly fine with that. But it is. I mean, police officers have to go through this as well. I mean, there's plenty of case law that's out there. It's like, oh yeah, the cops can lie to you to get you to say something. That's perfectly legal. But again, you're not always comfortable with that. And, and then the other thing is, do you want that to then translate to other parts of your life? In your relationships with people that matter, you don't want to be in a position of, well, I'm really good at deceiving people, so I'll just, turn on in that particular, skill set, and because then that will harm you down the road. All right. So a lot of your stories also involve confidential informants, or, more generally termed snitches. How do you, as a bondsman, as a recovery agent, how do you put it out there that you're looking for someone? Because, I mean, if they don't know that you're looking for them, people aren't just going to randomly call you and go, oh, hey, I just saw this person here. I've seen a lot of companies use Facebook, but how do you get the word out that you're looking for someone to kind of foster, maybe you're getting that call in?
Well, we actually do about 90% of all the bail in Northeast Indiana. So we have a lot of people that come through our doors. We have people that'll walk just into the building that has no business other than they want to take a picture of the board that has all of the pictures of the people. So it's a side hustle for them. And you do, from time to time, I have several phone numbers, that in my phone that just says CI. I sometimes will put CI with the last name of the fugitive just so I can identify it. You just build relationships with these people, and they last for a short time, and then they move on to something else. I've noticed that. One CI will drop off, and then maybe in 2 years they'll come back. I don't know if there's, I don't know the reason for it, but I've never had a CI last more than 3 or 4 months.
Well, I mean, generally their only value is for one or two people anyway, that they happen to be connected with that
Right.
for whatever reason. Now, I'm assuming that these also involve rewards.
Yeah.
That there's a payment for information. I know that over the years we've sort of refined that down. It used to be, well, if you give me $50, I'll tell you where they're at. It's like, I'll be more than happy to give you $50 once I have that person back into custody. But what sort of because that's an endless thing. Well, I guess they must have just left. So I mean, how do you handle the reward or the informant fee on those situations? I assume it's something similar.
Yes, I just tell them right at the beginning. When we apprehend the person, then you're paid. We've had people that will come. The person's not even completely been booked in, and they're in the office and they're receiving their pay. But that's how we do it. Some people don't want to be seen in our office. They're so afraid that they might be found out that I've had to meet them in different places, coffee shops, and to be able to pay them. But yeah, it can go anywhere from $50 up to several thousand, depending on how much the bond is.
Right. Yeah. Generally based on the size of the bond. So let's talk about the story that really I thought was the best example of the life that we're involved in here, and that's the checkmate story. It seemed to have all the components of all the pain in the butt aspects of bounty hunting. I mean, we can kind of go through these, but the one really jumped out at me was like, the wife of the fugitive, or the girlfriend, baby mama, whatever her situation was, had actually filed a restraining order against one of the bounty hunters. And I've never actually seen that happen. So tell us a little bit about more of that, and then maybe we can go through and kind of pick apart, some of the aspects that are common to. It just seems like it had every bad situation in recovery that could be there.
Yes, that story was very intense. It went on for several months. We were really close to owing money on that because in Indiana, I don't know how it is in Kansas, but in Indiana, you have 120 days before you have to pay anything out. So if you get them in 120 days, there's no money due to the court. So we try really hard to get them in before that. And we were getting close to that time. They did have some inside information. One of them, the man, he was raised by a police officer that his mother was no longer married to, but that person was helping them through, telling them different things. And I think that might have been why they were able to, keep us away from that house for so long. And it finally just, it got to the point where there was just no more time to waste. I mean, our recovery agent had a protective order against him, a lot of lies. And so he wasn't even allowed anywhere close to the property. So it had to be that we just, took it upon ourselves and just had to bust through the door. And we knew he was there, and we just never could get him. And we had to finally bust through doors and finally get him.
Well, one of the things that occurred in that, I mean, like I said, I've never seen the restraining order, but I mean, again, that generally only applies to that particular agent. And it's like, okay, well, we'll just go get somebody else that can go in there. But
yeah.
You told a story about basically while you were inside, the girlfriend was essentially faking an assault to someone else on the phone. It's like, I mean, I've had lots of people lie about what happened after the fact, but I've never actually heard a story of them faking it while they're on the phone, with somebody else who's in theory going to be the contemporary witness that, oh, look, this was going on. Oh, don't touch me. How are you? That sort of thing, slamming herself against it. So maybe talk about some of those experiences of people. I mean, I assume this is pre-body camera days. I mean, a lot.
Yes.
A lot of bounty hunters or bondsman recovery agents now have body cameras just for that particular reason. I've had at least 5 occasions off the top of my head I can think of where police reports were made by the other people in the house, and the bounty hunter's able to go, here's the body camera footage, and they're like, and it's completely false, completely fake. But unfortunately, had they made those same allegations against the police officer, they would have been charged. But if they make him against you, well, it just turns out that it wasn't there. But how often does that happen, that those sort of allegations, not so much the craziness of faking it while it's ongoing, but after the fact, how often do you get those allegations?
Yeah, I mean, every once in a while, probably in 18 years, we might have been sued 3 times. So it usually doesn't go too far. But we have had it where, we have been actually sued and we had to go to court 3 times. And a lot of times you just pay whatever just because it's nuisance.
Right.
Because there's attorneys involved, because you know how it is. You're incorporated, you have to take an attorney. So you have an attorney, and yeah, so there has been, but not very often. We've had lots of complaints,
Right.
but you know that once I had a police officer come in the office, I think early December, and because we're right across the street from the police department, and she said, I understand you broke into a house at such and such address, and the owner is wanting to press charges for burglary. And the officer looked at me and she said, do you have anything in writing that says you have access to that house? And I said, absolutely. And the woman's daughter had a warrant. So of course we're going to go in. And so I had to show her the paperwork, and she asked for a copy. I sent it to her and she said, don't worry about it. It won't go any further than this. But people are very angry because they're trying to trick you. As long, you're trying to trick them, and it's just a game is how it feels to me. And I do think about that, about the deceiving, but I look at it, I have to feel like I'm role playing, almost like you're an actress. And once that case is done, you get out of that role to be able to go home and not be that person. And that's what I've had to do, because I'm like you. It's like, I don't want it to spill over into my personal life. I want people to trust me.
Right. Well, absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, on the complaints and entry on that, it's like, going into someplace. I think the biggest problem people have, or recovery agents have on that, is when you get into the situation involving a third-party residence.
Mm-hmm.
It's one, and you get this a lot with landlords as well. The landlord will be like, well, you can't come in here. It's like, yeah, but that's not really the person that's renting from you, they've given me permission and contractually to go in here. So you, as a landlord, don't have the ability to exclude me from that. But then you'll get the police to come in and go, well, the landlord says you can't be here. Well, okay, I don't care. But then you're having this legal argument over what constitutes trespass with the police on the curb. And it just becomes a huge problem. So now also in this checkmate case, that to continue on with the issues that you see every now and then, but seem to have culminated in this case, was that he had the person you're looking for had a special hiding place in the house. Now, I've seen a few of those, not a lot. I mean, one of my, biggest, memories on that is we had a guy that he had a hiding place underneath the bed. And they basically had all these boxes around the bed, around the edge of the bed. So, this is just under bed storage. So he would go dive in underneath the bed, and someone would go kick those boxes in and cover it behind him. So it doesn't look, well, you look there, it's like nothing's there. Yeah. The last time we hit the house when we got him, there wasn't enough time. And basically, so he dived back underneath the bed, but his shoe was still sticking out. And so going around, it's like, and they kick the shoe, and the shoe doesn't move. And they're like, oh my God, he's underneath here. But so, and then, ultimately we end up having to take the entire mattress off the bed and pull him out from underneath that. But so what was the deal in this checkmate? How was that hiding space? Because that seems like it was even more intricate than just, boxes around the bed.
Yeah, absolutely. The house was on a concrete slab. There was no crawl space. I searched that house. I can't tell you how many times that house was searched. There was no crawl space. We looked around that house. It was on a complete slab. So we kept getting these phone calls from a CI, which I think it was actually the guy that we were looking for, the defendant, laughing at us and saying, yeah, you're walking on top of him. And I thought, no, there's no basement. There's no crawl space. But I kept that in my mind thinking, we've got to figure this out. So when we did bust through the doors, and my daughter and the owner's grandson was flipping the house upside down while I was in the kitchen watching, the baby mama kick her own butt, just throwing herself up against the walls. I was just, flabbergasted. I finally walked outside because she was having so much fun by herself. That a lady stops, and it just happened to be the realtor for the house that sold the house. So after we spoke, as she was just getting ready to pull off, I thought, well, I'll ask her. I said, is there any way that there's a crawl space under that house? And she goes, yeah, there is. And I said, where is the door? We cannot find it. She goes, well, you got to rip up the bathroom carpet. It's right next to the toilet, the trap door, the little access. And so that was the only reason we found it, because you just don't go in a house and start ripping up carpet.
Well, no, I mean, it's not like a car drug stop by the police where they dismantle the whole car.
Yeah.
You can't exactly tear the place up when you're looking for somebody.
Right. So then once she told us that, then we knew where to look. And sure enough, I mean, he had dug him a nice area. Like you could almost stand up. And
Really?
had
Wow.
cinder blocks. Yeah, he dug it out. It was pretty nice down there.
Okay. Well, I didn't realize that from the book that was, so I figured it was just like, okay, it's around the plumbing. And so they've got this little, trench there to where they don't have to elevate the plumbing or anything. And that just runs it out there. But
it might have been that way. It might have been that way originally, but this guy dug it out.
I mean, we're talking the Silence of the Lambs sort of thing there as far as
cinder blocks. Yeah, cinder blocks, and he had plenty. Who knows what was behind the cinder blocks? We never did go down in there because within minutes the police ended up showing up because the woman allegedly was being assaulted in her own house, and so the police came. There was several cop cars. So yeah.
Well, and that was something else with this particular story. I mean, you'd been by the house several times, and it's like, bang on the door, and either nobody answers it, or and you can hear people inside there, but you can't really physically go in unless you have some more indication the person's there. You listen to the door, hear him talking. Okay, well now we're going in. Get him to answer the phone inside, that sort of thing. I mean, other ways to get, or you have a CI that says, I just walked out. He's in there. He's in this room right here. Okay. Yeah, we're going in for there, but you can't do that. But it seemed like there were multiple times in the story where you would then go knock on the door, and 5 minutes later, here comes a patrol car coming by. Yeah. What are you doing here? So either the neighbors are highly vigilant, which is unusual, or someone inside is calling saying, "Hey, there's somebody here." It just. Was that in Fort Wayne proper, or was that one of the suburban cities? Or, I mean, because our experience has been, it really varies. The cooperation you get from the police varies from city to city and department to department. We've been routinely have situations in one particular city where you'll go knock on the door. They won't answer the door. They won't come out. But suddenly the police come by, and then the police tell you they're going to arrest you for trespassing if you don't leave. And so then you're having an argument with the police. Like, well, what are you going to arrest me for trespassing for? You don't have the owner of the property saying I can't be here. But again, you don't want to get in too much of an argument with the police. So he's like, okay, I'll go here. But is that common in your dealings in that area, or was it specific to this? And the police essentially were hindering your ability, and not so much in a way. I mean, obviously the police, the police don't want somebody to come in there and you're aggressively or physically manhandling someone who's not the fugitive. That's going to be a crime. That's going to be something that they need to jump in on. Right. Or, I mean, there might be some defenses to that, self-defense, that sort of thing. But, I'm not saying that they shouldn't be involved at all. But there's lots of times that they'll come and insert themselves into situations and they'll just be wrong. What is your experience with the police in general on that, as far as, how supportive or how helpful they tend to be when you're trying to apprehend someone?
Well, unless they call and ask us for help.
Right.
I usually never had any help from them on the other end. If I would go somewhere, like I had one lady that I had the boyfriend call and say, she's in there, I just left. So I knew she was in there. I went to just pick her up, and the police showed up, and it wasn't that I called them. And I don't know if it was a neighbor or who, but the police officers came and they knocked on the door. They said, we'll knock on the door. They knocked on the door. She didn't answer. Well, she was asleep. She's not going to answer the door. I explained to them that, the boyfriend wanted her picked up. She has a warrant. And they said, well, she didn't come to the door. And I said, well, it's because she's asleep. And they said, well, you need to leave. And I said, is there a reason that you want me to leave? And he said, yes, we're here to protect the peace and to protect you. And so we find it dangerous for you to be here. So we want you to leave. And I said, okay. And so I just went and sat in my car and waited for them to leave. And then when they left, I called one of my recovery guys and I said, meet me over here. We're going in.
Right.
And, that one wasn't in the book. But yeah, I've never had help from the police. We went into Ohio here recently. And I was at the back door. I had one of my guys at the front. And we had cooperation from the person that owned the complex, as we thought we did, and to come find out we didn't. He was going to go get the key to let us in, and instead he called the police, and the police showed up, and they were very upset that we didn't give them notification that we were in their town. It was a very small town, so we had to get through that. And luck have it, the man gave up. He just come walking out of the front door. So I don't know how that would have probably ended up, probably not good for us. But he came and walked out and just leaned up against the car. And I looked over and I thought, oh my goodness, that's my guy. I said, well, there he is right there. And yeah, he just gave up. We were there for probably 45 minutes banging on the door. But it was locked, and it was a third party house. It was a girlfriend that we didn't have on the bond, so we knew we couldn't go in. So, yeah, I've never had really cooperation from the police unless they initiate it first that they need our help.
Well, and that's one of those things that, that is really important as a recovery agent, especially if you're going out of state or into an area that you're not familiar with, is what are the rules, what are the laws? Like Kansas has a notification requirement in statute. Before we're trying to go pick somebody up, we have to notify local police. This is who we're after. This is our paperwork. We're going to be in this area. Now, generally, you'll go check in, with the police department wherever you're going. Okay, we think that in this person, we're going to be in this area. And it's more or less just a heads up. The statute says they may accompany you if they choose to, which means they're not under any obligation to do that. And most of the time, they don't want to. All right, well, we know you're there, so if we get a call about strange men in tactical gear, we'll know that it's you guys. Although, and this is just a separate topic, what we've seen here with all the stuff recently is I've had 3 instances where my fugitive guys have been accused of being ICE agents because they're in tactical gear. And so there was a time that they were actually surrounded by a group of people on the street while they're in their car, screaming at them, that they're ICE agents and they need to get us one, they're not ICE agents, but so what are you doing? So, I mean, you get some of that now. So let's go back to one last aspect of the checkmate story that I thought was interesting was at the very end of the story, you're taking the guy out and he's on, I don't want to go to jail. And his parents come flying up. And they want to go throw themselves into in the middle of the situation. And it's like, and now, I mean, they were the ones that guaranteed the bond, if I remember that correctly, right? Yep. So, so you have, this is what we talked about as far as a helpful versus a hostile co-signer. You would think that person or those people would be like, okay, here he is. Let's get him back in here. Let's get his life back on track. Let's put this behind him. But no, they were all for that. How often does it happen, especially in recovery, that, and in general, keep in mind, recovery is only a small percentage of the people we deal with. But the ones that we do have to go pick up and get back in custody, how often are we dealing with basically a co-signer or a guarantor on the bond who is actively supporting and actively hostile to getting that person picked back up again?
I have had several, and the one thing that I hear all the time when I make that first call to that indemnitor is he's a grown man. Yeah, he's not my problem. And I'll say, well, sure he is. You signed the bail contract and you're on the hook for $10,000. So, if he's a grown man, maybe you should have left him in jail. But you didn't. And what I usually say, anybody says is, this is hilarious. Well, you can't get blood out of a turnip. That's just, and it's so true. So there are people that sign the document and they know they have nothing to lose. And so, that's on our end. That's our fault for allowing someone to sign that doesn't have anything to lose because their signature means nothing.
Right.
But yeah, there are some that, that we have to deal with like that. And it seems like more than I want to. But yeah, a lot of them are hostile. They don't want their family member to be arrested.
Well, and you really you got into a point there that I think a lot of people don't really understand is, one of the criticisms about bail is because there's money involved. And so, rich people get out and poor people stay in custody. And he's like, well, no, we're helping people out anyway. But, even if you're getting a cosigner or a guarantor that you're probably not going to be able to collect from, as long as there's a chance that you can collect from them, they're going to be a lot more cooperative in getting that person to court, getting them back in. If they have absolutely nothing to their name, they're the other guy living under the bridge with him, that's like you have no leverage over that person to try and get them to help you get that person back in because there's no consequence to them if things go wrong. I mean, so that's the whole idea of trying to get buy-in from the person's community support network, which is always the term that we use in bail, the community support network, people that know the person, friends, family, coworkers, that sort of thing. You want them to have an investment in making sure that person goes to court. That's why bail works.
Right.
And that's why letting people go without bail doesn't, because there's no one out there keeping an eye on them. But so you have to be particularly careful about who you pick. And generally, parents are pretty good people to pick. But not always. I mean, if you have a history. Now, kind of a couple other stories, actually sort of a combination to the stories in the book. I don't want to do all the stories in the book because we need people to go out and buy your book and read the rest of the stories. But a couple other stories, apprehensions involving cars can be some of the most dangerous for both police officers and fugitive recovery agents. And you got a couple of those stories in there where there were cars involved. Can you tell us a little bit about those and how you generally deal with car situations?
Yeah, I think when your adrenaline starts going, and it's really hyping up, you don't think real clear. And I don't know about you, but as soon as you're close to that fugitive, your adrenaline just gets out of control. And there has been times that I've driven through stop signs and blown lights, and it's not smart at all, but you really aren't in your right mind. I mean, it seemed like the more the bounty, 50,000, 100,000, it's just so much money to lose that, if you have to go through a light or, as long as it's safe and you're not putting anybody in danger. But yeah, I mean, cars are very dangerous. I'm like you. I would rather find somebody in their house. It's a lot less dangerous, in my opinion. Once they're outside, it's sometimes hard to get people into custody, especially if there's cars involved. And you're right, it's a tough one.
Well, I mean, and if you're trying to remove someone from a car, I think one of your stories was basically a person was in the car and you managed to get the door open, but weren't able to get him pulled out right away, and then you had to leap inside to basically try and disable the car. Right. And of course, we've had several times, get the keys out of the car. That way, if the keys are out of the car's not going anywhere. That car that's now been neutralized is not something that they can either run away in or run over you with. Because, I mean, getting hit by a car, I mean, that's a multi-thousand-pound piece of machinery that's coming right at you. I mean, it can easily kill you, if not, maim you completely. So again, those are really potentially dangerous situations. And, but you also then can't just go, okay, well, they're in the car, I guess I have to let them go.
Right.
But if you can follow them or something along those lines, that's good. If they don't know that you're there, but once they know you're there, well, then it becomes dangerous to everybody.
Right.
And that's when it's like, okay, if there've been lots of times where, okay, we're following this person. Well, we're going to stand back a couple, 3 car lengths, and we're going to call the police from here. Because the police have 6 or 7 different cars that they can converge on that guy. Those cars are primed up with stop sticks and everything else in the world.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll get that person in. But I mean, if you're going after somebody on a $1,000 bond, well, you don't want to do $5,000 worth of damage to your car.
Right.
Or have them completely panic, because it always seems like it's the little ones. I mean, not always, but a lot of times it's the stupid little traffic ones. I know a bounty hunter that got shot across the chest with a shotgun blast. Didn't kill him, unfortunately, or not unfortunately, but fortunately didn't kill him.
Yeah.
On a $500 traffic warrant. What are you doing? And frustrating when that one is they didn't actually charge the guy. He made some claim that he thought there was just somebody breaking into his house. It was the same person that posted the bond. I mean, there was no question. I mean, he identified himself, but the agency, this was across state, and they're like, no, we're not having anything to do with this. So, his only consequence of that was he went back to jail on the $500 traffic warrant, and they let him go 2 days later.
Yeah.
So
probably OR.
Well, I mean, this has been a few years ago. It definitely would have been OR today.
Yeah.
So, all right. So what does the future look like for Grandma Susan? I mean, are you working on an audio version of the book so that all of us who can't read and end up driving in the car, you can tape one of those and put it out there? Or is Hollywood optioned your book yet?
I do have the Kindle. And I had it uploaded. I sold 3, but I seen that there was a format issue. So I pulled it down, and I'm going to be working on that. I'm actually in Florida for a little over 7 weeks to be able to work on that. I also started some children books. It's going to be Grandma Susan and Max the Mighty Moose. And it's children's book. And it's where Grandma Susan retires from bounty hunting, and she moves into the woods. And she finds a moose that she makes friends with. And she hops on his back, and they ride through the woods, and they locate little children that have got themselves lost. And all the little children, of course, are named after all my great-grandchildren. So yeah, it's super cute. So I'm going to have that hopefully completed before I head back to Fort Wayne. But yeah, we'll see. I mean, I'm already 63, so it might be time to start thinking about that cabin in the woods.
It's like I don't know how you take 7 weeks off, man. I can, I can't take 7 minutes off. But from a publishing perspective, I mean, I know Amazon has a great deal, and again, your book's on Amazon. Everyone should go there and look at it. But from a publishing perspective, if you're not going to self-publish, one of the best ways to get published is via a children's book. And especially if you can, it's usually they're fairly simple. There's a large market for them. You do have to find an illustrator, so you got to find somebody that can illustrate that for you. Because I mean, you got to have words and pictures for your kids' book. Otherwise, it's just a haiku or a poem. Because the thing is, kids' books are really not that long, for the most part. So you've got to have something engaging. But if I know when I actually had written a couple of unpublishable books. I mean, one of them was like 700 pages long. And so it's like, yeah, you're way too long and there's way too many events. And so the editors kick that all back. But when you talk about that, when you're looking at being an author, they always say kids' book is your best way to go. But again, the second thing is write what you know. If you don't know what you're talking about, the book's not going to come off as authentic. And one thing your book actually absolutely comes off on is authentic. You clearly have lived these experiences. I mean, anybody in the bail bond world, I mean, these are all stories that you'll recognize. I mean, if you read some fiction story about a bail bondsman, you're like, oh yeah, that I've seen that. That's accurate. Yeah. But then the other 6 things about that, that's all crap. There's no way that would have occurred in that way. Michael Connolly has a couple of bail bond references in there. Some of them are pretty accurate, and some of them are pretty demeaning. And if you look at those books, the Harry Bosch novels and the Lincoln Lawyer novels. He's the author of those. So got a children's book coming up. I mean, again, I think that this would be the sort of thing that, you have a female lead. Again, not a 20-year-old female lead, but an experienced female lead. It would be a good thing for like a little, a Netflix type deal. So I mean, I would definitely see and try and push that out, and maybe see if Janet Ivanovich can help you, introduce you to some people there, and get you a real life version of Stephanie, pre-retirement Stephanie Plum.
Yeah, that'd be wonderful.
All right. So the book is Grandma the Bounty Hunter. It's available on Amazon.com. You can search under Grandma the Bounty Hunter, the name, or you can just search under Grandma Susan, because you will come up as the author under that as well. And everybody needs to log in and order a copy for your bail bond library. I would encourage, most of our listeners are in bail world. So anything you can do to add to your collection of bail bond books, I would highly recommend it. Any last words you'd like to throw in there, Susan?
Yeah, it's actually, when I wrote the book, I was thinking of my grandchildren because they love my stories. And so what I did was, I'm not sure if you noticed, they were very appropriate for children 12 years and older. And that's why I did that with the book, because you know how dysfunctional sometimes our stories can be and not appropriate. So I had to make that appropriate for children 12 years and up. So even their children can read it.
Well, that was a nice thing. Because a lot of the last guest, I don't think the podcast come out yet, but the last guest, Michael Lever, we talked to, one of the things we talked about was the exposure to the dark side of life that you get, especially in the fugitive and in the recovery end of things. And it was nice it was insinuated and hinted at, but it wasn't just explicitly out there. We're not dealing with Quentin Tarantino recovery agent sort of book here. It was, you as you pointed out, is very clean. And the book ends up with a lot of little articles or essays on being a grandmother, and that was kind of sweet at the end of the book as well. So I liked that also. All right, well, awesome. Thank you very much, Susan, for taking the time to talk to us. I really appreciate it. Again, everybody needs to log on and buy the book. Actually, let's see if I can actually get this up here to where we can actually see a picture of the cover. Is it? Can we see that? Is it good? There we go. Grandma Susan, Grandma the Bounty Hunter, available on Amazon.com.
Thank you so much.
We would like to thank our guest today, Grandma Susan, for taking the time to talk to us today. I have to congratulate her on taking the leap to actually write a book about her bail bond experiences. We all hear the "you should write a book" line from customers, but most of us never do. And I encourage everyone in bail world to support her and pick up a copy of the book. Again, go to Amazon.com, search for Grandma the Bounty Hunter, and again, please join us on the next episode of the Bail in the Midwest podcast, where we'll continue to bring you critical information and conversations with people involved in the criminal justice system.
Join us again next time for the Bail in the Midwest podcast, hosted by Shane Rolf and executive produced by David Stuckman.